I've lived long enough to know that disrespect rarely arrives with raised voices. No, real disrespect comes quietly, wrapped in polite tones and fake smiles, served like a side dish with your morning coffee. That's exactly how Brianna delivered her ultimatum that morning. It was barely 8 a.m. The sun had just begun pouring through the kitchen window, washing the room in a warm glow that didn't match the tension settling thick in the air. I had just taken my first sip of coffee when she marched in with a stack of papers, far louder than necessary, and slammed them right in front of me. The mug rattled. The table shook. Daniel flinched. Brianna didn't care. "There," she said sharply, tapping the papers with her manicured finger. "Starting next month, you either pay rent or find somewhere else to live." Her words sliced through the quiet like a knife. She didn't even bother to hide the smugness coating her voice. She spoke as if she'd been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it even. As if removing me from the home I built for decades was some personal triumph for her. I stared down at the so-called rent agreement, even though I didn't have to. I already knew this wasn't about money. It never was. It was about control. It was about Brianna wanting the house, my house, to feel like her territory, even though I had opened the doors to her with nothing but kindness from the day Daniel brought her home. "You can't expect us to carry you forever," she added, crossing her arms. "It's only fair. Fair. That word again. People like Brianna love hiding behind words like fair, reasonable, practical, as if dressing cruelty and logic somehow makes it noble instead of nasty. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, calm, steady. Then I let a slow smile spread across my face. Not because I agreed. Not because her demand intimidated me, but because I knew something she didn't. Something Daniel knew, but was too afraid to mention. Something that made this entire dramatic performance almost amusing. Daniel sat across from me at the table, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the plate he wasn't touching. He wasn't a bad son, just a quiet one, gentle in ways the world sometimes punished. He had always avoided conflict, even as a child. That part of him never changed, not even after marriage. "Daniel," Brianna snapped, as if she sensed his silence weakening her moment. "Say something," he swallowed hard. His jaw worked as if he wanted to speak but couldn't force the words out. I didn't blame him. I could feel the pressure radiating off her from where I sat. A lesser man might have tried to jump in and defend himself, but I had lived through too much life to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I simply lifted my coffee and took another slow sip, letting her impatience fester. She hated that. "I'm not asking," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "You've lived here long enough without contributing anything." That was a lie, and she knew it. The electricity bill, the groceries, the repairs when the roof leaked last winter, all handled by me, but she had no interest in truth. She was crafting her narrative, one where she was the overworked, unappreciated wife, and I was the freeloading in-law. The more she talked, the clearer it became that she'd been building toward this confrontation for months. Still, I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. Instead, I leaned back, folded my hands, and smiled again, wider this time. Her eyes narrowed. "What is so funny?" she demanded. I shrugged lightly. "Just thinking." "About what?" she snapped. "About how life has a way of surprising people," I said. Daniel's eyes flicked up to mine. A flicker of understanding crossed his face, followed by the slightest hint of guilt. He knew what I was referring to. Brianna didn't. She leaned forward, anger brewing behind her perfectly drawn eyebrows. "Well, you won't be laughing next month. The choice is simple. Pay rent or move out." I took one last sip of coffee, set the cup down gently, and looked her straight in the eye. "I'll think about it," I said calmly. But the truth was, my mind was already made up, because Brianna had no idea what was coming, no idea what decisions had already been set in motion, no idea that the house she felt so entitled to wasn't as securely hers as she believed. My smile wasn't defiance. It was anticipation. Breakfast had just become interesting, and she had no clue. People like Brianna think elders end up living with their children because they're weak, irresponsible, or looking for an easy life. But my story, like most stories, was far more complicated, shaped by loss, illness, and the kind of loneliness that creeps in quietly after a lifetime of love. It started a year ago. On an afternoon that should have been ordinary, I was trimming the roses in the backyard when a sharp pressure built in my chest. Not the dramatic collapsing kind you see in movies, just a tightening, a warning. By the time I walked inside, my hands were shaking, and cold sweat clung to my neck. The doctor called it a mild heart attack, as if there was anything mild about feeling your own body betray you. Daniel rushed to the hospital the moment he heard. He sat beside me all night, his knee bouncing nervously, his eyes refusing to leave the heart monitor. Every time it beeped, he jumped a little. That guilt he carries now, I saw the beginnings of it that night. "Dad," he said softly, "you can't stay alone anymore. Move in with us. Just for a while, until you recover." He meant it with love, and I heard that clearly. I had no intention of burdening him. But the thought of returning to an empty house, our house, after the heart attack felt heavier than I wanted to admit. We had bought that house 40 years ago. My wife painted the kitchen walls yellow because she said it made the mornings feel warmer. Her laugh still echoed in those rooms even a decade after cancer took her away from me. I kept everything the way she left it, as if changing anything would erase her completely. But after the heart attack, I realized memories can comfort, but they can also suffocate. I needed people again. I needed movement, noise, life. So I agreed. Daniel's face lit up with relief when I said yes. He squeezed my hand like he had when he was a boy, clinging to me after nightmares. For the first time in years, I felt needed. Brianna played her part perfectly at first. "Oh, of course you can stay with us," she had said with a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It'll be nice having family around." Those first 2 weeks, she brought me tea, asked about my medication, even folded my laundry before I could reach it. But the shift came slowly, almost imperceptibly. Small things at first, tiny cracks in the act, the way she sighed loudly when I settled. Into the armchair she considered hers. The tight smile whenever Daniel canceled a date night, because he wanted to check on me. The pointed questions like, "Do you think you'll be strong enough to go home next month?" At dinner one night, she joked, too casually, "We might need to start charging you rent," followed by a laugh that never matched the sharpness in her eyes. Resentment doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, brick by brick, until one day it stands tall enough to cast a shadow over everything. I tried to ignore it. Truly, I did. I reminded myself she was young, juggling a career and marriage. Maybe the stress was getting to her. Maybe she just needed time. But then came the cold glances when she thought I wasn't looking. The exaggerated clearing of her throat when I asked Daniel for help. The way she would whisper to him the moment I left a room, her tone always clipped, always disapproving. For years after losing my wife, my house had been silent, an echo chamber of memories. When Daniel invited me in, I dared to hope that living with family would stitch those torn pieces of my heart back together. Instead, I found myself walking on eggshells in a home that wasn't mine, around a woman who wished I wasn't there. And yet, I stayed because I believed in family, because Daniel needed me, and because I thought kindness would eventually soften her. I didn't know then just how wrong I was, or how much she would soon regret underestimating me. I used to believe a house becomes a home when laughter fills it, when people move around each other with ease, when kindness hangs in the air like the smell of warm bread. But living with Brianna taught me something different. A house can look picture perfect while suffocating the person inside it. The humiliations didn't arrive all at once. They slipped in gradually, disguised as preferences, suggestions, and house norms. The kind of things you can't complain about without sounding petty. That was Brianna's specialty. It started the morning she threw out my leftovers. I had cooked a simple stew the night before, the same recipe my wife used to make when Daniel was a child. I found the pot scraped clean and the container sitting in the trash. "Oh, I didn't think you'd want that old stuff," she said with a shrug. "We try to keep the fridge organized." Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, meant to cut. meant to remind me that nothing here belonged to me. Then came the house rules. She printed them, laminated them, and taped them to the fridge like I was a misbehaving tenant in a boarding house. No eating after 8 p.m. No leaving dishes in the sink, even for a second. No adjusting the thermostat under any circumstances. No sitting on the white sofa. And my personal favorite, no using the washer on weekdays because it disrupts the water pressure. Funny how every rule applied only to me. Whenever I walked through the hallway, she would exhale loudly, as if my footsteps alone drained the energy out of her. If I watched TV, she'd enter the room, grab the remote, and say, "I need the silence to concentrate," then turn the screen off before I could respond. She called my habits old-fashioned. "You fold clothes like it's the 1950s. She laughed at my handwriting. "Do you ever text? Or is that too modern?" She mimicked the way I double-checked my medication. "Relax, you're not going to explode." Every jab was framed as humor. Every sting buried under her thin smile. What hurt most wasn't her cruelty. It was Daniel's silence. He always looked torn, as if his words were trapped behind his teeth. But he never spoke them. Instead, he'd squeeze my shoulder gently after she left the room, like that tiny gesture was enough to make up for the void he left by not defending me. One afternoon, Brianna escalated things in a way that made my ears burn. The neighbors, the Nielsen's, stopped by unexpectedly to drop off some cookies. Nice people, always polite. We were all gathered near the entryway making small talk when Mrs. Nielsen asked kindly, "How are you settling in, John? Must be nice living with family." Before I could answer, Brianna let out a laugh too sharp to be friendly. "He's settling in a little too well, honestly. We can't keep him out of the kitchen, and he keeps the thermostat at, what was it, John? Arctic level?" The neighbors chuckled politely, but she wasn't satisfied. She continued, "We're trying to teach him the house rules, but he's stubborn. You know older people, they get set in their ways." The comment hung in the air like something rotten. I felt my face grow hot. A humiliation you can ignore inside the family becomes something else entirely when spoken in front of strangers. I opened my mouth to respond, but she cut me off before a word escaped. "Oh, and he also keeps his shoes by the wrong door, even though I've told him half a dozen times. We're working on it, right?" She patted my arm like I was a misbehaving child. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Even they could feel it. Her need to belittle me, to display her dominance like some twisted badge of honor. Daniel stood behind her, eyes lowered, jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he might finally say something. He didn't. I forced a smile, thanked the neighbors for the cookies, and excused myself. I walked to my room, closed the door, and sat in the dark, listening to the faint sound of Brianna laughing downstairs. It wasn't the volume of her cruelty that hurt. It was the constancy. A steady drip wearing me down day after day, and yet, even then she had no idea that this house, her kingdom of petty rules, was built on a secret I had kept carefully tucked away, a secret she would soon choke on. Brianna thought she was tightening a noose around my neck with every rule she invented, every insult she dressed in sugar, every public humiliation she slipped beneath her smile. And maybe, for a while, it worked. But the thing about people like her is they assume silence equals surrender. They never consider that silence can also be strategy. The day after the incident with the neighbors, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is paused. I brewed a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for the sun to rise. There's something about early mornings that sharpens the mind, and that morning, mine felt clearer than it had in months. By 7 o'clock, I had called a taxi. I didn't tell Daniel. I certainly didn't tell Brianna. I simply stepped outside, eased myself into the back seat, and told the driver the address of the one person who had never once failed me in 20 years. My lawyer, Henry Collins. Henry greeted me with his usual calm smile, though I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes as he looked me over. "You all right, John? You look like you've been carrying something heavy." I laughed softly. "You could say that." We entered his office, the familiar scent of old books grounding me. I pulled a small black envelope from inside my jacket pocket and placed it on his desk. Henry's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't touch it. He knew better. "So," he said, leaning back, "is it time?" "Not yet," I replied. "But soon." He nodded, understanding me without needing the details. That envelope contained documents that would shift the earth under Brianna's feet if she ever learned what was inside. Deeds, account statements, a will she didn't know existed, and instructions, very specific ones, that would activate if certain conditions were met. I wasn't a wealthy man by billionaire standards, but I had lived carefully, invested wisely, and inherited land from my parents. Assets Brianna assumed did not exist simply because I didn't flaunt them. People like her believe only loud wealth is real wealth. I spent almost an hour with Henry, going over contingencies, tightening protections, updating signatures. With each document I reviewed, something inside me steadied, like I was reclaiming a part of myself I'd allowed Brianna to chip away. Before I left, I tapped the black envelope lightly. "Keep this sealed," I said, "and make sure it stays protected." Henry gave me a firm nod. "It's safe. When the time comes, just say the word." The ride home felt different. I sat straighter. The heaviness in my chest had eased. Brianna might have thought she was wearing me down, but what she didn't realize was that the man she saw as fragile was the same man who had built a life from nothing, survived grief, and raised her husband with resilience she couldn't begin to fathom. When I walked back into the house, she was in the living room scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up, but her voice cut through the air. "You were out early. Doctor's appointment. Something like that," I answered. She hummed in that dismissive, uninterested way. To her, I was too insignificant to question further. But now, when I looked at her, I wasn't just seeing the hostility. I was studying it, observing, cataloging, every cutting remark, every petty rule, every act of disrespect. Not out of bitterness, but with precision, like gathering evidence. Because there's power in documentation, especially when people reveal exactly who they are without realizing someone is paying attention. That morning marked a shift, a quiet one, unnoticed by the two people who believed they controlled my future. But control is a funny thing. It only works when the other person doesn't know he's holding the trump card. And in my pocket, still warm from my hand, was the receipt from Henry's office. A reminder that Brianna's reign over me was temporary. Very temporary. Brianna loved an audience. She fed off attention the way some people breathe air. And that night she had gathered a full table of it. Her friends from work, all dressed like they were attending an award ceremony, rather than a simple dinner at home. I could tell from the moment I walked into the dining room that something was off. Their eyes flicked toward me with that particular mix of curiosity and pity that only appears when someone has told a story about you before you even arrive. I took my seat quietly at the far corner of the table. Brianna was radiant in her chosen spotlight, laughing too loudly, glancing at me every so often with the satisfied smugness of someone who had already planned the script for the evening. I should have known the humiliation was coming. Halfway through dinner, right when the table was warm with chatter and clinking forks, she tapped her glass with her manicured nail. The room silenced instantly. Even Daniel looked confused, his fork hovering mid-air. "I just want to make a little announcement," she said, smiling wide enough to show every polished tooth. "It's something important for our household." She turned to me with a look far too sweet to be anything but poison. "As of this week," she continued, "we finally decided that John," she gestured toward me with a flourish, "will be contributing rent. Like an adult." The words hit the table like a dropped plate. Her friends shifted awkwardly. One woman blinked rapidly, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. A man coughed into his napkin. Another woman muttered a soft, "Oh," as though she'd witnessed something private and indecent. Daniel's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, caught lying about homework. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then stared fixedly at his plate as if hoping it would swallow him whole. I felt the sting, sharp and immediate, not because of the money, but because of the public spectacle. Brianna could have spoken to me privately. She could have respected the dignity of the man who raised her husband. But respect was never part of her vocabulary when it came to me. I inhaled slowly, grounding myself, Then I smiled. A calm, gentle smile that seemed to rattle her for a half-second before she regained her composure. "Well," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I appreciate the clarity." A ripple of discomfort went around the table. Brianna wanted a reaction. Anger, embarrassment, maybe even tears. But she found none. My polite smile was the one thing she hadn't planned for. She pressed on anyway. "It's only fair," she said to her friends, as if seeking their validation. "Everyone should contribute. We're not running a charity." One of her friends shifted in her seat. "Does he not already help around here?" "Oh, he tries," Brianna replied with exaggerated patience. "But trying doesn't pay bills," Daniel finally spoke. "Maybe this isn't the time," she cut him off sharply. "It's exactly the time. My friends should know we're setting boundaries." I looked at Daniel. He looked back, anguished, and then down again. And in that moment, surprisingly, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Brianna had no idea who she was talking to. No idea what I owned, what I'd built, what I carried quietly while living under her roof. She thought she was announcing my downfall. She was announcing her own. I lifted my glass slightly in a mock toast. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "I'll take care of it." The table remained silent, tension ringing like a struck bell. Brianna smiled triumphantly, believing she had won some invisible battle. But inside I thought only one thing. Steady as a heartbeat. You have no idea what you're asking for. I've always believed there are two kinds of breaking points. The loud ones that explode instantly, and the quiet ones that build like pressure beneath the earth until a single careless step triggers an earthquake. Mine had been building for months. Layered humiliation, swallowed anger, and long, lonely nights where I wondered how my life had narrowed into this house, this tension, this version of my son's marriage. But the final step, the one that cracked everything open, came on an afternoon so ordinary it almost felt cruel. I had been sitting in the backyard, mending one of my late wife's sweaters. It was a soft blue one she used to wear during winter evenings, curled against me on the couch while we watched old movies. After she passed, I kept only a few of her things, but that sweater. That was the one I reached for when the nights grew too quiet. I left it neatly folded on the patio chair when I went to refill my tea. When I came back, Brianna was standing there with a black trash bag, one hand gripping the sweater like it was a dirty rag. "What are you doing?" I asked, my throat tightening. She didn't flinch. "Decluttering," she said. "This old thing smells like mothballs." "It's time." My chest tightened. "That's my wife's." "And?" She shrugged. "She's gone." "You don't need this. Emotional hoarding. It's depressing." She dropped it into the trash bag with a careless flick of her wrist. Something inside me snapped. Not with anger, not at first. It was something colder. A stillness, like the moment before a storm when the wind stops entirely. "Please take it out of that bag," I said quietly. She smirked. "If you want it, dig it out yourself. But it's not staying in my house." My hands trembled. Not from weakness, but from a surge of clarity I hadn't felt in months. "You should stop," I said softly. "Or what?" She scoffed. "You're just—" Daniel walked in then, freezing mid-step. "What's going on?" "Your father is upset over trash," Brianna said. "He's being dramatic." Daniel looked between us. He saw the sweater in the bag. His lips parted slightly, guilt flickering in his expression. But he didn't step forward. He didn't speak up. He just stood there, helpless and small. That hurt more than Brianna's words. I reached into the trash bag, pulled the sweater out gently and brushed off the dust. My hands were steady now, strangely steady. Brianna rolled her eyes dramatically. "You can't keep dragging your grief around," she said. "It's pathetic." The last thread of restraint inside me unraveled. I straightened slowly, holding the sweater against my chest. And for the first time in this house, I let the silence speak for me. I turned and walked past both of them without a word. Behind me, I heard Brianna mutter something snide, and Daniel whisper, "Bree, stop." But I was already gone. Into my room, closing the door with a finality that startled even me. Inside, the black envelope sat exactly where I had left it in the drawer. I picked it up and held it in both hands. The weight of it felt different now. Not just paper, but consequence, protection, transformation. Every humiliation I had endured was folded somewhere inside it, waiting to be acknowledged. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, the sweater beside me. My mind raced with memories of my wife, her laughter, her warmth, her gentleness. And then I thought of Brianna's cold smirk. The contrast was almost unbearable. That was when the realization settled solidly in my bones. I couldn't stay here anymore. Not another day, not another hour. But leaving didn't mean disappearing quietly. No. If Brianna wanted me out of her house, she would get exactly what she asked for, far more than she anticipated. I packed my bag calmly, neatly, folded clothes, toiletries, the sweater, which I laid carefully on top. The black envelope went into my inside jacket pocket. Against my heart, close enough to remind me that I wasn't powerless. When I stepped out of my room, the house was quiet. I could hear faint murmurs from the living room, Brianna lecturing Daniel, no doubt, about boundaries and adult responsibilities. I walked past them without pausing. Brianna noticed first. "Where are you going?" I turned slowly. Somewhere I'm still respected. Daniel stood up abruptly. "Dad, wait!" But I didn't stop. I simply touched the black envelope through my jacket and said, "I'll be in touch." Brianna laughed. "What, are you running away?" I met her gaze and smiled, a small, knowing smile that made her expression falter. "No," I said. "I'm preparing." And then I walked out the door, leaving behind not just their house, but the version of myself who tolerated their cruelty. Enough had finally become enough. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books, the scent I had grown accustomed to in Daniel's home. But it felt foreign now, almost alien. I moved quietly around my room, folding shirts, tucking sweaters into a worn duffel bag, and carefully placing the black envelope in a secure pocket. Every item I touched carried a memory, a fragment of a life I had shared here, yet none of it outweighed the suffocating tension Brianna had cultivated. Packing wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. I was reclaiming space, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming a part of myself I hadn't realized had been eroded. Daniel knocked softly on the door before entering. His eyes were red, though he tried to hide it. "Dad, please don't do this. Just stay a little longer. We can work this out," he said, voice tight and hesitant. I shook my head gently. "Daniel, I can't. Staying here would only let her continue to push me around, and I can't teach you to respect yourself if I don't respect myself first." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. I feel trapped, Dad. Trapped in my marriage. She controls everything. My paycheck, my decisions, even my family. I've let her dictate everything for years, and I'm tired. But I don't know what to do. Hearing him speak the truth so openly made my chest ache. This wasn't just about me. This was about him, my son, the boy I had raised with so much care, now struggling under the weight of someone else's manipulation. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his frame. "Daniel," I said softly, "you've been living like a man whose voice doesn't matter. But it does. You have a right to stand up, to take control of your life, and to decide who belongs in it. Don't let fear keep you from doing that." He looked up, eyes searching mine, the vulnerability in his gaze raw and almost unbearable. "But I've done nothing for so long. I feel helpless." "You are not helpless," I assured him. "You've been silent, yes, but silence is not weakness. It's waiting for the right moment to act, to protect what matters to you. And you will. You'll find your strength." He swallowed, nodding slowly, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on him. I could see the cracks of hope forming behind the anxiety, like sunlight struggling to pierce a stormy sky. I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You can," I said, my voice firm yet gentle. "You have everything you need inside you. But first I need to leave, for both of us. Staying here now will only let her continue to dominate, to manipulate, to divide. You need space to see clearly, to breathe, to prepare yourself for what comes next." He dropped his gaze, biting his lip, the conflict in him painfully evident. I don't want to be alone in this." "You won't be," I said, tightening my hand on his shoulder. I'll be close, always. But sometimes leaving is the strongest way to stay. Don't forget that." He nodded again, tears welling in his eyes, and I could see both grief and understanding mingling there. This wasn't goodbye, even though it felt like one. This was preparation. This was the calm before the storm we both knew was coming. We understood each other without needing more words. I picked up my bag, the black envelope pressing against my chest like a promise. The sweater of my late wife sat neatly folded on top, a symbol of everything I had lost, everything I had loved, and everything I would protect no matter what. Daniel followed me to the door, lingering in the hallway, as if unsure whether to step forward or hold back. I looked down at him, my voice soft but unwavering. "Be strong, Daniel. Trust yourself, and remember, you are not alone in this." He swallowed hard, finally nodding fully. "I'll try, Dad. I'll try." I gave him one last squeeze on the shoulder, turned, and walked toward the front door, each step steady, deliberate. The goodbye wasn't a farewell. It was the start of a shift, a subtle, almost invisible reversal that neither Brianna nor anyone else in that house could have anticipated. When I stepped outside, the weight on my chest felt lighter, and for the first time in months, I felt the faint glimmer of control returning to my life. I reached the front door, my bag slung over my shoulder, the sweater folded neatly inside, my heart steady for the first time in months. I paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at the kitchen. The sunlight fell in a soft golden slice across the countertop, highlighting the mess Brianna had left in her latest attempt to assert dominance. The crooked placemats, the half-empty coffee mugs, the lingering scent of her perfume, sharp and cloying. I knew she'd noticed the small imperfections immediately, and it made me smile. Slowly, deliberately, I placed the black envelope on the counter. It was thick, heavy, and unmarked except for the faint crease where I had folded it to keep it safe. The leather-like texture felt sturdy under my fingers, a physical reminder of every decision I had made quietly over the past months. Every investment, every account, every measure I had taken to secure not just my life, but the dignity she was trying so desperately to strip from me, lived within that envelope. I reached for a pen and wrote a simple note. Nothing ornate, nothing extravagant, just a few words that would spark curiosity, perhaps anxiety, perhaps fear. I held the pen in my hand for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle in, and then scrawled, "Open this when you're ready to know the truth." The handwriting was my own, unshaken by the years or the tension. I folded the note neatly, slipped it atop the black envelope, and pressed it down lightly so it would stay in place, as if I were tucking a secret into the folds of the house itself. The act was simple, almost mundane, yet it carried power. There's a subtle satisfaction in leaving something behind that cannot be ignored, a reminder that presence is not measured by proximity alone. Brianna could come home in a few hours, all brimming confidence and authority, and there it would be, lying there, innocuous at first glance, daring her to unravel it. I imagined the curiosity flaring behind her eyes, the brief panic before she understood its weight, and the thought alone warmed me. I didn't linger, though I could feel the pull of anticipation trying to root me to the spot. The envelope was enough. Its contents would speak louder than words, louder than arguments, louder than the daily indignities she had so carefully curated. And I knew, that once it was opened, nothing in that house would feel the same again. The power she thought she wielded, the small victories she had carved out for herself, would be replaced by the reality of what she had underestimated. I imagined her discovering it, the moment she lifted the note, read my handwriting, the tension curling in her stomach, the quickening of her pulse as the envelope revealed its presence. She would not know what waited inside. She wouldn't understand it at first glance, but she would feel it. The shift, the first ripple of imbalance, imperceptible at first, spreading quietly, preparing her for the storm she couldn't yet see. Even Daniel might pause. Even his habitual silence might crack for a fleeting second. The envelope had the power to awaken truth without a single spoken word. And that, I thought, was the most satisfying kind of power. I took a deep breath, letting the sunlight warm my face one last time before stepping outside. Every step down the porch felt lighter, freer. For months I had lived under scrutiny, under constant judgment, under a woman's relentless need to assert control. Now, the black envelope waited like a quiet judge in the kitchen, ready to deliver its verdict when she chose, or perhaps when she was forced, to open it. I didn't look back again. I didn't need to. Its presence was enough. The suspense, the anticipation, the looming revelation, it was all set in motion. Brianna had no idea that a single object, unassuming in appearance, held the power to tilt the scales, to challenge her sense of dominion, to expose truths she had never considered. And I walked away knowing that for the first time in a long while, the house was no longer hers entirely. The black envelope remained behind, silent, patient, and waiting. And the game had just begun. The first night in my small apartment felt almost surreal. Boxes lined the corners, half empty and half organized, but the air itself seemed lighter, freer. No sharp glares, no whispered critiques, no rules designed solely to humiliate me. Just quiet, just space, just me. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I could breathe without weighing every word, every step, every breath against someone else's temper. The apartment wasn't much. Just a modest living room, a kitchen that fit the essentials, a bedroom that smelled faintly of lavender and sunlight. But it felt like a sanctuary. I unpacked slowly, placing a few books on the shelf, arranging the sweater from my late wife carefully on a chair, and sitting down to sip tea without interruption. The calm was almost intoxicating, a reminder that life could exist beyond constant conflict. I began to fill my days with things that reminded me of who I had been before Brianna's tyranny and who I could still become. I called old friends I hadn't spoken to in years, laughed over shared memories, and felt the kind of warmth that comes from being known and appreciated. I volunteered at the local community center, helping organize small events for the elderly and families in need, and discovered the satisfaction of contributing without judgment. Evenings were spent at the senior book club, where conversation flowed naturally and opinions were valued rather than criticized. I hadn't realized how much I had missed connection, laughter, and the quiet thrill of living life for myself again. Yet even amidst this peace, the black envelope never left my thoughts. It had been the anchor during my days of humiliation, and now it became a symbol of careful preparation. I visited Henry Collins again, the lawyer who had watched over my plans with steady patience. We sat in his office, the familiar smell of leather and old paper grounding me. I watched him as he carefully reviewed the documents in the envelope, each paper representing not just property and inheritance, but the protection of Daniel's financial future. Every deed, every account statement, every legal contingency had been meticulously arranged, ensuring that Brianna's manipulations could not touch what was rightfully ours. Henry glanced up from the envelope, his expression calm but knowing. "Everything is in place, John," he said. "When the time comes, Daniel's position is secure and the assets are protected. This isn't just about revenge. It's about justice, stability, and giving your son the chance to stand on his own." I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went deeper than pride or vindication. It was relief, the kind that comes from knowing you've preserved what matters, even when others try to strip it away. The envelope was more than paper. It was a lifeline, a shield, and a promise all at once. Returning to my apartment, I placed it carefully in a drawer, next to the sweater that reminded me of love lost and strength regained. Life was simpler here, yes, but it also allowed me to prepare, to observe, to grow, and to wait for the moment when quiet power could become undeniable influence. I smiled softly as I glanced around my modest sanctuary. Peace had returned, and with it, perspective. Brianna might still believe she held all the control, but she had no idea that patience, preparation, and foresight were far stronger weapons than temper or arrogance. And as I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through my hands, I knew that for the first time in a long while, I was ready for whatever came next. The black envelope rested quietly, waiting for its moment, and so was I, calm, steady, and quietly in control. The morning had been quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts sound louder than they have any right to. I was sitting at the small kitchen table of my apartment, a steaming cup of coffee warming my hands, a novel half open in front of me. The peace I had cultivated over the past month felt fragile, yet steady, like a calm sea before a storm. And in many ways, I should have known the calm wouldn't last. The knock came sudden, hard, impatient. My first instinct was to ignore it, but the volume and intensity told me that ignoring it was no longer an option. I opened the door, and there she stood. Brianna, her face flushed with fury, her eyes wide and blazing. The smell of her perfume was sharper than ever, almost suffocating, her posture demanding, almost theatrical. "John, what the hell is this?" she screamed, thrusting the black envelope toward me. Her hands shook with rage, and I could see her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. I stepped aside, letting her storm in. "Brianna," I said calmly, keeping my voice steady, "please sit down. We can talk." She didn't sit. She waved the envelope like a weapon. "Don't you dare play calm with me. Do you know what I just discovered?" Her voice pitched higher, echoing off the small apartment walls. "The house? This whole time. It's yours. And Daniel, my Daniel, is the sole legal heir?" She practically shrieked the words, disbelief and anger tangled together. "You've been hiding this from me." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat before answering. "Yes," I said quietly, deliberately. "The house is mine. Daniel is the legal heir, and everything you've done, your attempts to control finances, to manipulate him, to marginalize me, has been documented." Her jaw dropped, then tightened as if she were trying to physically restrain her own outrage. "Documented? What do you mean documented?" she demanded, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. "Are you telling me you've been planning this behind my back? You've made me look foolish. You've made yourself look foolish," I said gently, not a trace of venom in my voice. "Your actions were visible. Your manipulations were recorded. Everything you tried to claim as power, as authority, has been countered by facts. Facts in writing, facts legally binding. The envelope you clutch so desperately holds those facts." She stomped a foot, eyes darting around the room as though the walls themselves might accuse her. "This isn't possible. How could this happen? How could Daniel just let you do this? He's supposed to be—" "Daniel had no choice," I interrupted softly, letting the weight of the words sink in. "He was controlled, manipulated, and constrained by your greed for years. This isn't about anger or revenge. It's about restoring balance, giving him back what's rightfully his." Brianna froze mid-step, the envelope now trembling in her hands. You can't just— This isn't legal. He can't—" Her voice faltered. Her confidence was collapsing, and for the first time, I saw the fear I had been waiting for. Subtle, but undeniable. "Yes," I said simply. "It is legal. Every document, every account, every instruction was prepared months ago. Everything is in order. You were unaware. You assumed control, and you assumed I was powerless. But assumptions are dangerous, especially when the truth is ready to catch up." Her face twisted with disbelief and fury. You've been lying to me this entire time, pretending to be weak, pretending to accept my nonsense. While all the while—" She stopped abruptly, realizing even she couldn't finish the thought. I leaned back slightly, calm, unshaken. It wasn't lying. It was patience. It was strategy. And now the truth has found its way into your hands. I'm not angry, Brianna. I'm prepared. She stood there, silent for a moment, the black envelope heavy between her fingers, and for the first time, I saw her powerlessness, the exact mirror of how I had felt under her rule. And in that silence, the shift was complete. The house, the inheritance, the future of Daniel, none of it was hers to control. All she had was the envelope, the undeniable proof that her manipulations had been documented, and that her attempts to dominate had failed spectacularly. I finally stood, taking a measured step closer, my voice calm but carrying the weight of certainty. "Brianna, this is the consequence of your choices. It doesn't have to ruin you entirely, but it does mean you cannot continue to dictate what isn't yours." Her lips trembled. The rage was still there, but now it was tangled with fear and comprehension. For the first time, she understood that power can shift quietly, and that underestimating someone like me was a grave mistake. And in that moment, I knew the house, the inheritance, and the justice I had carefully prepared were mine, and Daniel's, unshakable, undeniable, and finally free from her grasp. "You said—" The house felt heavy the day the family meeting was scheduled. Brianna had insisted on involving a mediator, thinking she could control the narrative, thinking she could present herself as the wronged party. I agreed, of course, because appearances mattered little compared to truth. Daniel, quiet as ever, walked beside me, carrying a tension in his shoulders that had grown over years of quiet compliance. The mediator's office was neutral. No trappings of either side's authority, no walls that favored one voice over another. We sat around a large table, each family positioned on opposite ends. Brianna's friends had been invited, though she hadn't told them the full scope. The air was thick with expectation, with the kind of anticipation that comes before a verdict of long overdue justice. I remained calm, hands folded, the black envelope resting on the table in front of me. Brianna's eyes darted toward it, suspicion flaring, her bravado taut. She clearly hadn't expected me to use it. Not in public, not like this. The mediator opened the session formally, and I began. Brianna, I want to outline the facts clearly. This isn't personal. It's documented. I opened the envelope, sliding papers across the table, receipts, bank statements, and legal documents all meticulously organized. These show attempts to control Daniel's finances, the repeated humiliation and restriction I endured, and evidence of the house and inheritance being manipulated under the assumption you had authority that legally never belonged to you. Gasps echoed across the room. Some of her friends murmured, stunned. Brianna's lips parted, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury, but she tried to maintain control. This isn't real, she spat. These are lies, manipulations. You've made this all up. I shook my head, calmly lifting a receipt that documented a transfer of Daniel's account she had manipulated without consent. No, Brianna. Every transaction, every action is recorded. The attempts to isolate Daniel financially, to make him dependent on your whims, they're all here. And yes, Daniel, you have the right to speak. Daniel's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw hesitation, the shadow of fear he had carried for years. But the environment, the facts, the truth laid bare before everyone, emboldened him. He straightened in his chair and looked directly at his wife. I've been silent for too long, he said, his voice shaking but firm. I've let you control everything, thinking it was easier to avoid conflict. But it's not easier, it's wrong. I am not powerless, and neither is my father. Brianna's mouth opened, but no words came. The weight of years of deception, manipulation, and entitlement finally landed on her like a tidal wave. Her arms trembled, her cheeks flushed, and the confidence she had relied upon so heavily collapsed under the undeniable truth. The mediator leaned forward, scanning the documents, the receipts, and the testimonies. Ms. Brianna, he said formally, based on the evidence presented and the legal documentation, you may be legally removed from the property. The house belongs to Mr. John, and Mr. Daniel is the rightful heir to the estate. Your actions to control finances and manipulate family decisions have been fully documented and cannot be overlooked. Brianna's hands flew to her face, her voice quivering now. You can't do this. This is my home. It's never been your home legally, I replied calmly. It was never yours to control. The moment truth is acknowledged, respect must follow. Control is not earned through manipulation. It is earned through fairness, transparency, and integrity. Daniel stood fully now, his voice steady, strong, the first time I had heard it in years. Brianna, I am done being silent. I am done being manipulated. You will no longer control me, my home, or my life. Her knees weakened slightly, and I could see the first flicker of fear, not the fury of anger, but the recognition that her world had shifted irrevocably. The mediator nodded, signaling the formal conclusion of the meeting. Brianna's attempt to dominate had crumbled under the weight of facts, legality, and truth. For the first time in years, Daniel and I exchanged a look of quiet relief, a shared acknowledgement that justice had been served, not through revenge or malice, but through patience, preparation, and unwavering adherence to the truth. Brianna could scream, argue, or cry. It would no longer change the outcome. The public undoing was complete. The house, the inheritance, and Daniel's freedom were restored. And for once, I allowed myself to exhale fully, knowing that the balance had shifted, and it had shifted in favor of integrity, dignity, and justice. Brianna's attempts to salvage her image began immediately after the meeting. She stormed out of the mediator's office, voice pitched high with indignation, calling everyone unfair and biased. She tried to craft herself as the victim, her words laced with theatrics, as if anyone would believe that manipulating her husband and humiliating his father were signs of oppression. But the universe, it seemed, had grown tired of her stories. Even her own parents, who had once indulged her every whim, were waiting for her outside. Their disappointment was sharp and immediate. "Brianna," her mother said, voice trembling with restrained anger, "we raised you better than this. You cannot treat your family like objects to control. You cannot demand loyalty and respect while showing neither. Look at yourself." Her father, usually quiet and compliant, stepped forward, shaking his head. "We always taught you to be fair, to treat people with dignity. What you've done, this is not just wrong, it's shameful." Brianna's eyes widened in shock. Her carefully constructed web of victimhood began unraveling faster than she could react. She sputtered, trying to argue, but her parents' words were backed by the undeniable evidence now circulating. The black envelope, the legal documents, Daniel's firm declaration. There was no path back to innocence. Daniel, emboldened for the first time in years, spoke next. His voice was steady, calm, but filled with authority that had been absent for far too long. "Brianna, I've stayed silent for far too long. I've let your manipulations dictate my life, my home, and my peace. I want a separation. I need space to live freely, without fear or control." Her lips trembled, a sharp intake of breath betraying the panic beneath her bravado. The social circle she had cultivated, the friends she flaunted in the apartment, now shifted visibly. Whispers replaced laughter. Doubtful glances replaced applause. The very audience she had relied on to validate her behavior turned away. The illusion of power, once so robust, crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. I watched silently, observing the unfolding reversal, allowing it to speak for itself. There was no need for my intervention. The balance had shifted, and justice was now manifest in multiple layers. Her parents' disappointment, Daniel's newfound authority, and the social abandonment that mirrored the isolation she had tried to impose on me. I finally spoke, calm and measured, letting the words carry weight without aggression. "Brianna, you are not being punished by me. The law and the truth have simply aligned with what is right. I will not evict you, nor will I seek revenge. Daniel now has full authority over this home, and it is his responsibility to manage it as he sees fit. My role ends here." Her face twisted, disbelief and fury clashing with dawning comprehension. The realization that she no longer held any control, that her manipulations were powerless against documented truth, struck her harder than any confrontation I could have staged. Daniel exhaled, a mixture of relief and determination softening the tension in the room. He looked at me, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you for guiding me, for showing me what was possible. I finally understand what it means to stand on my own." I nodded, allowing myself a quiet smile. There was no celebration, no gloating. Justice, when it arrives cleanly and decisively, doesn't need applause. It speaks for itself. The second power reversal had occurred not through anger or vengeance, but through clarity, truth, and patience. Brianna, isolated and exposed, could no longer manipulate, no longer dominate. The authority that had been misused so flagrantly was now in the hands of the one who deserved it, Daniel. And as I watched her retreat into confusion and frustration, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, the kind that comes when dignity is preserved and power is finally restored to the rightful hands. The house was no longer hers, the illusion of control shattered, and the quiet satisfaction of justice hung in the air, calm, inevitable, and complete. The house felt different that first evening Daniel moved in alone. The walls no longer carried the weight of Brianna's scrutiny, and the rooms no longer echoed with tension or silent judgment. Every corner seemed to breathe, relieved to be free from manipulation. I walked through the front door, carrying a small bag of essentials, tea, a loaf of bread, and a notebook filled with old recipes my wife had loved. I didn't need to bring anything else. Presence, patience, and quiet support were more valuable than any material gift. Daniel greeted me with a tentative smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in months. There was still hesitancy in his posture, a residue of years living under control, but his eyes had regained a spark, a flicker of the man he had once been. I placed the items on the counter and clapped him gently on the shoulder. "It's yours now," I said, letting the words settle. "Every part of this house belongs to you. Take your time, live here the way you choose." He nodded, swallowing hard, and for a moment we stood in silence. The absence of conflict was almost deafening. Then he spoke, his voice quieter than usual but steady. "I don't even know where to start. I've let her control me for so long, I feel like I'm starting from scratch." I smiled, warmth in my chest. "Then start small. Start with what makes you happy. Rebuild your space, your routines, your confidence. You'll see. It's not about undoing the past. It's about creating the present you deserve." We walked through the rooms together. I helped him rearrange the furniture, suggesting small changes to make each space feel personal, alive. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and tea, and I showed him how to make a simple cup the way my wife had taught me decades ago, letting the aroma fill the room and calm the nerves that still lingered. Over the next few hours, we unpacked boxes, sorted old photographs, and discovered long-forgotten memories tucked away in drawers. Laughter, quiet and genuine, replaced the tension that had dominated the house for years. Daniel began to speak more freely, asking questions about bills, the garden, even small repairs he had always deferred. Each decision, each choice was a thread weaving him back into ownership of his life. At one point, he paused in the living room, looking around at the familiar yet transformed surroundings. "I can't remember the last time I felt like this. Like I actually mattered," he admitted softly. "You always mattered," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But now you get to see it and feel it for yourself. The home isn't just the walls or the roof. It's the life you put into it, the choices you make, the confidence you reclaim. That's what makes it yours." By evening, the house had shifted in energy. The weight of past cruelty had lifted, replaced by calm, warmth, and potential. We sat together in the quiet living room, tea in hand, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace that had little to do with victory and everything to do with love. We didn't speak much after that, but words weren't needed. In the stillness, Daniel's independence and confidence began to blossom, and I realized the greatest victory wasn't proving anyone wrong. It was watching my son reclaim his life. A house had become a home again, and for both of us, healing had finally begun. I remember that morning as if it had been etched into my memory with deliberate precision. Brianna had slammed her demand across the breakfast table, voice sharp and triumphant. "Either pay rent or find somewhere else to live." Daniel sat silently, shoulders tense, eyes downcast, too afraid to intervene. "And me?" I smiled. Not out of agreement, not out of humor, not even out of sarcasm, but out of clarity. I knew something she didn't. At the time, it must have seemed maddeningly casual, even inappropriate. She expected fluster, panic, or humiliation. She expected a reaction that could be twisted, manipulated, or belittled. Instead, I gave her nothing to use against me, only a calm, unshakable smile. It was the quiet assertion of boundaries, the invisible line I had been drawing for months, the silent knowledge that power is not always loud, that patience and preparation speak far more than rage or bluster. Smiling in that moment wasn't just a personal shield. It was a choice to refuse to engage on her terms, to step outside the theater she had created in my home, and to observe. Every comment, every petty humiliation, every manipulation became data, a map leading to eventual resolution. I didn't act immediately because timing matters more than impulse, and control is often revealed in patience. That simple curve of my lips was the first public note of a symphony she had no idea was being composed. Looking back now, after months of struggle, observation, legal preparation, and careful maneuvering, I understand why I smiled. It was the recognition that dignity cannot be rented or bought, and that self-respect is not something anyone can impose upon you. It is something you reclaim quietly, deliberately, and without apology. It was the anticipation of justice, the understanding that kindness is not weakness, and that those who mistake it for compliance are always surprised when the moment of reckoning comes. I thought about Daniel, the years he had spent under her control, the subtle ways she had eroded his confidence, and the relief I felt seeing him finally stand, finally reclaim authority over his life and home. That smile, in its quiet defiance, was also for him, a demonstration that restraint and foresight are sometimes the truest forms of strength. It was proof that patience allows one to act decisively, when the stakes are highest and when the lessons are irreversible. I realized that the lesson extends far beyond any one confrontation. Life often presents people who test boundaries, who confuse arrogance with strength and cruelty with power. We meet them with varying degrees of success, sometimes faltering, sometimes silent, sometimes smiling. But the choice to maintain dignity, to protect oneself with composure rather than confrontation, is where true strength resides. My smile had been the first act of reclamation, the quiet whisper that I would not be diminished, and that my worth was intact despite others' attempts to redefine it. As I reflect, I also understand the deeper meaning. Revenge is not always dramatic or destructive. Sometimes it is subtle, orchestrated through truth, preparation, and the unwavering commitment to fairness. Sometimes it is simply living with integrity, helping others reclaim their strength, and standing as a quiet example of resilience. It is the embodiment of lessons learned, boundaries respected, and the knowledge that kindness, patience, and clarity are formidable tools when wielded wisely. That morning, Brianna thought she had control. She underestimated patience, preparation, and the power of dignity. My smile was a promise that she would witness consequences, but not through spite, through the inevitability of truth. It was the quiet declaration that life cannot be stolen without accountability, that self-respect is non-negotiable, and that reclaiming one's worth often begins with a simple, unshaken acknowledgement of who you are. And so I smile even now, remembering that day, not in bitterness, not in triumph, but in clarity. My smile had a reason. It was the reflection of dignity preserved, boundaries respected, and a life reclaimed with wisdom, patience, and unwavering self-respect.